Welcome back to the How the Race Was Won podcast. I'm Dane Cash, and it is, well, it's Worlds time. We're in the middle of it already. Cosmo Catalano, bike racing analyst extraordinaire, Cosmo Catalano. How are you, bike racing analyst extraordinaire, Cosmo Catalano?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. It's been a little bit less of an eventful week from a bike racing analysis point of view. So
it has. I'm over here wondering how. I wonder how if we have a listener out there, a Swiss German listener. How do you say extraordinaire in Swiss German? It's probably just extraordinaire. But if there is a word, I'd love to know it. It's World Championships time in Zurich, in Switzerland, and we are excited to talk about the time trials, while also acknowledging that they are time trials, and therefore, by their very nature, a little bit less of a tactical game. You can't really rely on your teammates. Drafting doesn't really play a role. It's not supposed to play a role. You know, it's the rules exist to keep that from happening, but...
Well, I guess it wouldn't make sense if it were Ghana to Red Bull. Filippo Ganna caught up with one Primoz Roglic in the finish of the race. And
only the very end, right?
The very end. But also,
yeah.
Very short time gap relative to the previous
true.
time.
That is a good point. So we'll talk about the men's CT. We'll talk a little bit about the women's CT, and obviously we'll have more on that. We will do a little bit of around the league, talking about the things that have been going on. Luxembourg, Cosmo, I know you've had some thoughts about riders balancing their bodies in certain ways on bicycles that are allowed or disallowed by the UCI. Also, we're going to take some questions. I sent some questions out to our Discord channel, the How the Race Was Won channel, and we've got some good questions from our members who are on the Discord channel, and can't wait to get to those. And we'll do a little bit of looking ahead to preview the upcoming road race action at the World Championships. Before I go any further, I got to say, if you're a member, that we're just so grateful that you are. A little bit of member appreciation here. You keep us going, and we're so happy to have you. And if you're not a member, become one, and then I can appreciate you. If you want my appreciation, that's all it takes. Actually, it's pretty simple. Head on over to escapecollective.com/member, sign up, support us, and everything we do here at Escape Collective. Cosmo, what is the headline from the men's individual time trial at the 2024 UCI Road World Championships?
Remco Evenepoel's the fastest time trialist in the world.
I feel like that is highly accurate, and two, like, what else can you really say? Yeah.
It's a little weird, right? Because you had the Olympics earlier this year, and we had a lot of overlap between the two podiums, or at least between
although not entirely.
It wasn't exactly a carbon copy, and it was, they were different courses, but it was still kind of like, oh, hey, wait, these folks again, okay.
So Remco Evenepoel won the men's TT, and he was the favorite. So that's not a big surprise. I will say I was generally surprised that it was as close as it was, especially on a course with not an especially challenging climb, but a climb where you would think that Filippo Ganna would be significantly disadvantaged to Remco Evenepoel. In the end, it was only a 6-second gap. And then Edoardo Affini, 54 seconds further back. Josh Tarling, 1:17 back and forth.
No, it was really
Jay Vine,
two-person race. All respect due to Affini.
Those two riders, it was definitely Evenepoel and Ganna were the ones who were contesting this one. So how did it all unfold? How was this race won?
I would start with Ganna on course, looking strong, looking visibly large, I think, compared to Remco. Remco comes into the start house and backpedals, and his rear derailleur actually is probably more the issue, considering where the chain fell off, is not in the right spot or is too far up with the cassette, and his chain comes off. He's got like 45 seconds to his start, and people are trying to get his chain back on. A lot of people helped out. Eventually did get it sorted, did not seem to have much of an impact, although apparently his power meter wasn't working. So he was sort of flying blind a little bit. But yeah, got out on course. First time check was pretty close. Second time check at the top of the hill, which you would have expected to be the disadvantageous time check for Ganna, was actually not that much further out, around 9 seconds. And then they came down the hill, and Remco is up by almost 20 seconds, which is surprising a little bit. Not that Ganna has bike handling issues like some riders do, but I think he has shown a little bit of shakiness in some more tighter technical TTs. It didn't seem like a super technical descent, but that might be part of that gap. And then kind of over the last...
gravity was on his side.
Gravity's on his side, right. But you still have to, you still have to turn, right? You have to make it around the corners. And there's a lot of...
You do.
You know, it's not like everybody was getting in an aerodynamic tuck. I mean, they already were in aerodynamic tucks, but it wasn't, I don't know. Anyway, we get this big gap for Remco, and then over the remaining quarter of the race, since it was the third time check, Ghana actually brings the gap much further down. I think.
Yes.
I think part of that was it was flat, and so he could just be real strong. But also, like he definitely caught Primož Roglič towards the end of the race, and he's not obviously going to slow down to stay in Remco's draft, but he didn't. I think what he did was fine. I think it's inevitable that people will overlap in TTs. He rode, right behind him until he got close enough that he's like, all right, this is too close, and then went right around him. No fines or anything like that. But he, by the time Remco came in, and again, Remco celebrated at the finish, like literally put his arms up in a TT, which is pretty unusual. It won by slightly less than 7 seconds. But yeah, it was not, as you say, though, you would have expected the big time gap to be at the top of the hill. You would have expected Ghana to maybe make up a little more ground on the descent instead of losing a bunch. And kind of seeing him come in, finishing as strongly as he did, really, I think there is still, as much as we don't talk about it that much, a lot of pacing involved in a time trial. And
oh, absolutely. I think for me, the tricky thing is just we, as the viewers or the commentators or whatever, we don't know. We can't say that much about the pacing. We know it's important. And we know based on the fact that there's pretty significant differences between the time checks. Like, okay, Remco's up by this much, and now he's only up by this much. So clearly pacing is important. To me, the thing that is also important, though, is that I, Dane, the viewer, can't that intelligently tell you, the listener, oh, so-and-so got it wrong in the pacing because of this. Because we just don't know. Yeah. It's certainly possible. Maybe Ghana coming that much closer in the end of the race, maybe that's an indication that he could have gone a little bit harder earlier on, and therefore the gap wouldn't have been quite as big. It could mean that. Or maybe it means the exact opposite, that he saved the right amount and he actually paced it perfectly, and that's the only reason it's as close as it was. I can't really talk that intelligently about it because we can't read his mind. Clearly it was important, but I'm not going to sit here acting like I know who paced themselves better today.
Yeah, and I think pacing's maybe the most important thing about time trials. I want to feel like professional athletes have a pretty good dial on it, but I also hear stuff kind of in conversation, or overhear other people's conversations, or listen to podcasts with Alex Dowsett where he talks about how many pros really, really struggle with pacing. And it's, the first thing I got told before my first time trial ever on a bicycle, coming in as a cross-country skier who basically every race is a time trial, they're like, yo, the first 10 minutes of a time trial, everyone feels like a hero. Look at it as a warm-up. Do not attempt to go hard in the first 10 minutes of the time trial. Obviously, if it's less than 10-minute time trial, you would not follow that instruction. But yeah, and I mean, it's sort of the great unknown, one of the last great unknowns of cycling, at least until people start really, really putting their power data out there in their Instagram stories and be like, man, I went way too hard right here, which maybe the next generation of cyclists will be there, that open and that ready to share the data. But I think for now, it's still going to be pretty secret.
Maybe another side of this same coin, can't really know, but I felt like Remco looked really good today. And again, it's what does that even mean? It does maybe mean something, or it maybe means nothing at all, but he certainly looked very comfortable on the bike. And I think that's just another sign of this great year for Evenepoel, who has been, I think he's met every challenge that he has had, and he has really come through extremely successfully this year. I think he's pretty well proven himself the best time trialist in the world now, and he's comfortable doing it.
And it's cool to see that the two best time trialists in the world look nothing alike, right? Like the meme pages were all over it today. Yes. They had the twins memes with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. It's very maybe it is an artifact of my coming into the sport at a certain time, but it was very much you really only saw in the popular consensus, the only way to be fast at cycling was to be a really big time trialist or a really skinny climber. And you're seeing a lot more body types kind of professionally performing well. And that's cool. I think it's easier for people who aren't a super skinny climber or aren't a super muscular time trialist to see more different, the range of body types that can perform in cycling.
Ghana and Affini both.
Yeah.
Huge
not small
guys.
Dudes. Yeah.
Fit the time trial bill.
Yep.
Evenepoel, small guy. Very good time trialist.
And I think this is actually something that Will Frischnecht maybe one of the early 2000s guys who went across and I think ended up on Garmin, but like raced like just kind of local Belgian races as a junior, as a U23, was talking about all the different body types you saw in these Belgian races versus, what you'd see in America.
Yeah. All right. I want to move the conversation a little bit just to talk about some of the other riders in this race. I feel like Jay Vine deserves some love because it's kind of always going to come away from today with because he crashed.
He crashed horrifically, like
badly.
Blood all over his face.
Yeah.
Still finished 5th.
Made for a good photo, and he's okay, so I feel like I could say that, right? Like I'm sure he's in a lot of pain, but still finished 5th, and it looked like he could have been in contention for a podium there. But yeah, I think what I want to say about Vine is that I feel pretty impressed with his showing this season, kind of across the board, but especially against the clock, because he was second in 2 World Tour time trials earlier this year. And I gotta say, I don't really... He has been an Australian time trial champion. So I don't want to say that it's entirely surprising that he was been able to be up there, but the field in Australia versus the world, there's a difference there. And the fact that he's been able to consistently, for the past year or so, be up there in some really strong fields against the clock. Yeah, it feels like he's knocking on the door. Obviously, he didn't get that win today, Sunday. But he got one in Burgos in August, second tier race, not quite the same level, but he did beat Affini there. Yeah, I think it's really impressive from Jay Vine, 28-year-old Aussie. And yeah, I think all told on the year, he just won the Mountains title at the Vuelta. And I feel like he's coming away from this year with some things to be proud of. And even if the wins weren't quite there, generally on the year, didn't win a lot. Nice job showing us the form.
This is a guy who came into the sport pretty late, who largely it wasn't really his discovery. I guess he was maybe going to sign with like a lower level UCI team prior to the Zwift Academy. But it's just like the guy who, did Zwift, pedaled hard, showed watts, at age 24, I think, first sign for Alpecin Phoenix. So
yeah, definitely. It's encouraging.
35-year-old, 36-year-old. How old are you now?
35. Another 30-something, because he is 30 years old. On the flip side of Jay Vine, Stefan Kung, I kind of expected more, and I think on the year, he was kind of expected to do a little better in a couple of different time trials this year, and he's going to come away from 2024 remembering it as the year that he won his first Grand Tour stage. So I think that's going to make it all better. I think it's going to make it all fine. But all told, 8th in the individual TT, I wasn't quite as good as he was probably expecting. 8th in the Olympic TT as well. He was like 10th. Yeah, he was 10th in the Tour TT. I just kind of thought Kung was going to do a little bit more, particularly in Switzerland. You would have expected maybe.
It's not a great TT for him. He's also pretty big.
It's not.
So
yes.
We'll see.
But if Ghana can come within 6 seconds of Evenepoel, you'd think. Yeah.
I mean, it's different. That's the thing is like to go through a TT. Like I don't want just the broadcast feed. I want every feed from every single camera through the course of the day. So you could see every single rider basically on every single part of the course and look at, where somebody comes into a corner, line up the exact spot, where somebody exits a corner, line up the exact spot. You can get down to tenths of a second and see where the differences are. Because that's the sort of thing where you can be like, we could talk about this all day where it's like, maybe this way, maybe this happened. But like to actually go through and get all that information be so cool.
Yeah, it's true. You're right. We need more information to really talk that intelligently about this.
I'm sure AI will do it for us. They'll just show that they'll show the feed to an AI and it will generate banter for a podcast.
I mean, honestly, I feel like in terms of getting better angles, we've seen some really good drone coverage, I feel like, this year. And I do think that's a real thing that is helping make it easier or giving us more opportunities to talk intelligently about the racing. Maybe talking less intelligently about racing, I just want to point out that I loved that Remco celebrated a TT. You just never see it. And I don't know that it was... I mean, it's bold.
It was close, right?
Yeah.
It was not like, I've got 30 seconds, I'm going to put my arms up for the crowd. It was
right.
We're like, wait, weren't you just up by 19 seconds? And now it's like when they first pulled up the clock, people are like, ooh, is that gonna?
When he went out of the Flamme Rouge, I started, as Sean Kelly would say, doing the calculation. In my head, I'm thinking, this is going to be really close. Is he going to pull this? And then the fact that he's still like 50 meters from the line, pulls up both hands, celebrates. It's the swagger that Evenepoel has had since he was a teenager. It's something that I think a lot of people don't love.
I would say that he comported himself extremely well today, right? Like
I am
a
fine
lot
with
of
it.
like he is not someone who has always done well when things are not going the way he wants and there's
Yeah.
a camera in his face. Somebody in the start house did push the camera back a little bit when they were trying to get the chain back on Remco's bike. I actually don't think it was Remco. I think it was someone else because it looked like there was some stuff on his arm that I didn't see on Remco's arm, like bracelets or a tattoo. And
This is why people tune in. It's Cosmo looking at the forearm of a person, and that's all he can see.
Right?
I'm just so impressed by that.
I'm waiting for Remco to have his meltdown, right? I'm waiting for him to start flailing around and screaming about people not being where they should be when you're on a bike, there's a guy holding up the bike. He's not touching the drivetrain. The only person putting inputs into the drivetrain is you. I am sorry that this happened to you, but it is kind of your fault. And he got off the bike.
But he did. He managed it well.
People sorted it out. He got back on the bike. He did the race. No power meter, which maybe for another time we'll talk about my feelings on power, just generally. But I think this is another thing that could really throw you off, really make you put you into diva mode. And it just didn't seem to factor at all.
Yeah, particularly where, I mean, some of these riders, the way they train is so power dependent. They're so locked in to doing their numbers. And to be on in the biggest competition of this discipline and not have that ability and have to ride on feel, that is extremely impressive from Remco.
I mean, watts are an objective measure of how much work you're doing, but it's not a measure of how hard you're working. Your body on any given day is going to put more or less watts.
Sure.
The thing, especially in a race like this, like the thing that matters is your engine, right? There's no real heart rate, kind of, but it's a lagging indicator. You really have to go on feel, and you have to know what your body is telling you, process that information. Yeah, you've got all this other data. It's important. But if you sit there and just look at that number at watts and be like, I just need to put watts at 320 or 360 or whatever these guys do for an hour, and then that'll be my best time. Like, that's just not how it works.
All that's true. For 52 minutes or however long it took him to do it, to not have that indicator.
Yeah, it would drive me insane.
I mean, that is, I think it deserves some credit. And it's something that, yet another thing that Evenepoel this year, to me, it's just, things are really coming together for him. He's just really managing to, I mean, everything is coming up Remco in 2024, I feel like. And he deserves credit for that. I feel like I've said this many times already this year, that he deserves credit for all the things he does do. So let's give it to him. World champion in the time trial, second straight year.
I'm done. Like, this is a time trial. It's not a Grand Tour, so I don't have to say I was expecting Remco to implode and do badly. Because
right.
That's never been what I've said. But it's, this is confirmation. He did a video with Victor Kampenhartz on Instagram and TikTok or wherever else he puts him up, where he's like out doing his like pre-race ride the morning of the TT. They're like riding along, stopping for some cows, crossing the road, like joking about their tire pressure. They got breakfast very casually, like, yep, this is the time I start. Everybody tune in. Kampenhart's like, wait, hey, what about me? They're like, okay, yeah. When do you start? Okay, this is the time he starts. Tune in then. It was like a lot of just relaxation, good sense of humor, like making the sport accessible and fun, at least for me as a 42-year-old who knows what the kids are into these days.
I think he's coming into his own as the star he has already been for several years, and he's really coming into his own now. And we'll talk about this in a bit. One of the top favorites, although not the top favorite, for the race that is on, well, next Sunday, the road race. We'll get to that. Any final thoughts from the TT?
No, nothing. I think we touched a lot. We covered a lot of ground for a bunch of guys
TT,
riding in the straightest line they could as fast as they could. So yeah.
I mean, it was a curving. I mean, they went from one place in Zurich to another. It was a curve.
Well, you want to make the straightest line through those curves because you don't want to ride an extra 10 meters.
Absolutely, yes.
How far do you think you go in 7 seconds at the speeds they're riding at, right? It's not that far. And if you are not careful about picking the right line through the corners, you will lose the race right there.
I just wanted to point that at some point they had to make a left turn because they did.
It's not NASCAR.
Come back to...
Well, I guess NASCAR, you only make left turns.
Oh, wait. Sorry. They had to make a right turn. That's what I meant to say. Because they went southeast and then they came back northwest. Anyway, right. That's the men's TT. Congratulations. New TT. Well, reigning and defending TT champ Remco Evenepoel does it. Takes the title for the second year in a row. Good on you as well, Villa Bogana, for making it such a great close battle in the end. And Eduardo Affini. Congrats on finishing on the podium. Let's take a break. All right, before we move on from the time trials, we'll have more on the veteran who is having the swan song season of a lifetime. I mean, you only get one swan song unless you decide to come back. But just real quick, what is the big headline from the women's TT?
Why the hell is Grace Brown retiring?
That's a great question. Why? Yeah, I'm sure there's a good reason, but she has now, on the year, won Liège-Bastogne-Liège, the Olympic TT, and now the World's TT. And quite an impressive ride from her. A little less close, still pretty close, beating Demi Vollering by 16 seconds. And just a really, awesome ride from Grace Brown. Chloe Dygert in third, a little further back, a little more distant of a third. Grace Brown, though. Yeah, what a season she's having. Check out We'll Talk for more on that. They already did, at Olympics time, they already did kind of a Grace Brown appreciation episode. And I wonder how they're going to handle this, because it's been yet another big achievement from her. So that's the time trials. We get the road races coming up. Before we get to that, let's answer some cues. Because, as I said earlier, we put out a call on the How the Races Won Discord channel for some questions. I've got 3 here that I really like, and I can't wait to answer them. We'll start off with Struan, who I believe, Struan, I think you asked us a question last Q&A that I really liked. And if that's true, hats off to you for being such a good and consistent Q&A participant. Struan asked, even if you take Pog out of the equation, UAE have won a lot of races and scored a lot of points this year, especially for a team without a noted sprinter. Is that all budget, or are they doing something other teams aren't? Now, before we say anything at all, I want to address the comment next in our Discord channel briefly. And that comment from John H. is a great comment, and it's, takes a deep breath, And that's all it says. Now, John, I assume that the implication you're making here is that there could be something untoward about UAE's results. And if that is true, neither Cosmo and I have any knowledge of it. So what can we intelligently say about that? Not much is the honest answer here. I'm not going to say it's not a possibility, because this is bike racing. This is professional sport, I should say, regardless of it's bike racing. But we have no more knowledge of that than of any other team. So I'm going to try to answer this question the way that I think Struan intended it, which is, what is UAE doing that other teams aren't, insofar that we can actually point to, that we know. And, that's what we can answer here. And I think there are answers. I think there's actually a couple of answers. And I don't think you can just say it's budget, because they aren't the only team with a big budget. There are other teams with big budgets. They have done something with their money that requires more than just having it. They have signed young, talented riders and developed them into stars. I mean, yes, they have resources to do it that certain other teams don't. But at the end of the day, if you look at Ineos, if you look at Visma, I think Ineos is a great example. They had several years of signing.
Great. It's like a bad example.
They are a solid example of the point I'm trying to make. They had a lot of money, and the riders that they invested in just didn't turn out to be the stars that they would have wanted. And simple as that. With UAE, they went and found next big things over and over and over again, and they turned them into next big things.
Still doing it. They're
still doing it. Yes. If you want to look over at Luxembourg, you can see that continues to happen. Every new signing this team makes seems to have the potential to turn into something great. And, Juan Ayuso, who won the time trial yesterday, is who I'm referring to. Isaac Del Toro. I mean, they have gone out and they've picked up young riders with a lot of talent. They've filled in the gaps with really solid domestiques, like Rafał Majka has been such a useful, reliable teammate for Pogačar this year. And it's the year that Mark Hirschi finally kind of turned it on for the team. Actually, last year in the smaller races, he was still pretty good. But yeah, there's just a bunch of riders that they signed either when they were really young, or they've, poached them from other teams, whatever, who have just, they picked the right guys, and they've done quite well. And it's not like they have 100% of a success rate. Look at like Joao Almeida at the Vuelta was expected to do better. They've had some misses. The whole team at the GC at the Vuelta was expected to do better. It's not like they are unbeatable all of the time. I think they just been really good at selecting the talent and turning them out, or at least helping develop them into successful riders.
I agree with what you've said, but I think you may be understating the role of budget here, Dane. I mean, this is a team whose corporate sponsorship is like the tourism board at UAE. There's probably some sheikh in UAE who thinks that it's wonderful and loves bike racing. And this is, even with all the money in the world from a cycling perspective, it's still a rounding error for the person writing the checks. And so these are people who can afford to go out and look around and see if they can find all this talent all over the world, from Mexico, from Slovenia, from wherever it happens to be. They can go, they can find it, they can research it, they can test it. In terms of support during the year, like it's not like you don't hear these stories of UAE seeming unprepared or chaotic or any of this. Like, it seems very, very, very dialed. It's sort of like the story we got from Jorgensen when he went from Movistar to Visma. And I should point out that it is from Movistar to Visma, not Movistar to UAE. So there are other teams who are pretty well organized, pretty well supported. But having a big pile of money that you can basically draw as much as you need from, like knowing that everything is going to be covered and that there really isn't going to be an end of the year meeting with an unhappy corporate sponsor saying, hey, where is my return on investment? All that stuff probably contributes a lot to their success.
I think that's absolutely true. And my point is more that they're comps. If we're talking like, who else can we compare them to? You kind of can't compare them even to the other teams with the big budgets. And that's what makes them stand out to me this year. And I think that's why this question is being asked. I don't think their budget is, dramatically more than the other 2 or 3 top teams in the World Tour. It's dramatically more than EF's budget, right? Like, it's dramatically more than Groupama's budget. And so if they were beating those teams only, then we could just point to budget. But the thing is, other teams with big budgets have not had the level of success that UAE has had. Visma has had a fine year, all told. Compared to last year, they seem like they're having a horrible year, but they're still like the second ranked team in the world, and they still win a bunch. But it's not even close. Like, UAE is so dominant, and Ineos, like, way back there on the success meter. And I think when these other teams with similarly large budgets, who also have less to worry about at the end of year meetings, are not succeeding at that level, there's clearly something to it.
I mean, I think Ineos may actually have a fairly uncomfortable end of year meeting coming this year. And
yeah,
is Visma's title sponsor money thing been resolved? Are they good to go with Visma Lisa Bike, or was that just a stopgap?
I think they're good to go for the near future.
Yep. I mean, I'm really curious to see what happens over the next 2 or 3 years with Red Bull. I think that is going to be really interesting. Just the people they have, the money they've got, the plans. Like, there's a lot of I think Red Bull probably looked at cycling, was like, there's probably some low-hanging fruit here. I bet we can find a lot of success. Even with a lot of our money, like, it's not going to be, like, we will get a lot of bang for our buck getting these low-hanging fruit, at least from a Red Bull sponsorship investment perspective.
I mean, that's honestly the dream that people in cycling have been trying to pitch to outside investors for a long time, which is, hey, Red Bull, the amount of money required to win a grand tour is a drop in the hat in your budget. Like, in this sport, we know that Primož Roglič is a huge deal, one of the best riders in the world. But the amount that he's paid compared to other professional athletes is not that staggering, right? And so, yeah, you would hope that a Red Bull will come in and say, oh, if we just throw a few $1 million at this, then we'll have a great tour winner.
It could be a good test of this question. If Red Bull can duplicate UAE's success, maybe it was budget. If not, maybe it was something else.
Right. And we'll see that hopefully in the next couple of years, because they are already signing young talents, good young talents. But did UAE leave any for the rest of the world to sign? And I want to add one other thing, because I don't want to attribute this all to UAE's brilliance. Or I also don't want to even have this implication like, okay, is that really the only explanation, or is there another one? Because I think we should also point out there's another big explanation. Jonas Vingegaard crashed and broke his body. And that didn't help that didn't help Visma's chances this year.
At the one race that...
a couple races, right? Didn't he crash
he is not a guy who's like Pogačar, who's going to go to Strade Bianche, who's going to go to Quebec, right?
Sure.
He has other races that he can win and does win, but the Tour de France is his whole season, 100%.
Right. I do think he probably wouldn't have won the Basque. He would have won the Basque Country, though. Yeah, so there's that.
That's okay. Great. It's kind of the same as the Tour de
France. Point here is that the Struan asked, taking Pog out of the equation. And even if you take the Pog Vingegaard thing out of the equation, if you look at the rest of the riders on this team and their successes, I think they are not. They're from the wins department. We're not talking about a team that is all that dominant. Like the team was extremely successful at supporting Pogacar, but beyond him, Mark Hershey has won a bunch of one days, but not quite the top tier one days. And that's Adam Yates has some wins. Like it's not like this team has just totally dominated. So I think the team has been really good. They've done a great job of building up his talent. They've gotten lucky a little bit with Pogacar's biggest rival being hurt. Yeah, lots of things have gone in their favor. All right, great question, Struan. I think UAE's been great. They've done a great job of developing talent, but Pogacar's also next level, and he raises the game. And I don't know. We'll see next year if the team can sustain it. All right, next question from Cafe Rider. How many leaders is too many leaders? Of the infamous Movistar Trident, is one outright leader always better? Or are there real circumstances where dual triple leaders are better? Really thinking of the loss of Wout van Aert for the Belgian team and Remco in particular, but also the US team, Jorgensen, Paulus, Simmons, who has good form. I think we're talking about Worlds here. Yes, Cafe Rider? And I think that's actually an important question because I think there's different answers with one-day races and stage races. I think one-day races, I think lots of potential leaders is a really good thing. I also think that's kind of true for stage races, but I think generally with stage races, you almost always have a clearer hierarchy. And I also think that anytime we like to joke about how bad a multi-leader approach has been, it's generally because that team never really had a great chance to begin with, even with their top option. And I think you can also point to several really successful multi-leader approaches that worked out because options 1 and 2 were like the 1 and 2 best, or at least second and third best riders in the race. Like Ineos had, or Sky, which was it at the time? Froome, Thomas Bernal, when Vingegaard and Roglic collectively together helped break Pogacar. I mean, these are double-pronged attacks. And yeah, I think there was an option 1A and a 1B, but it worked out really well that they had multiple options. So, long-winded way of saying, I think my answer, and Cosmo, tell me if your answer is different. My answer is how many leaders is too many leaders? I'm thinking it's like 4 is too many for a stage race, and 9 is too many for a one-day race. I'll take every rider, not every rider, okay, but maybe like I'll take 4 leaders in a one-day race. Why not? I mean, I think it can work, and we've seen it. We've seen times where Quick-Step has totally bollocksed it with having multiple leaders, but we've also seen Quick-Step
I've said more times that they get it right.
Just crush it because they had so many different options, and at the end of the day, it's like, oh, Florian Seneschal won. Sure, why not? Because everybody was worried about that other guy, and that I think can happen a lot more in a one-day race. Cosmo, what's your take?
You have anticipated my response, which is like, I'll answer your question with a question by saying, what do you mean by leader? I think it works pretty well to have one person who is nominally the leader. You, for all the pre-race interviews, are like, no, this person is the leader. This person is the leader. But when you get out on the road, everybody knows, there are a lot of strong guys. They know who is strong in a certain way. Who is everyone going to be watching? I think a lot of Quick-Step's success with the multi-leader plan was not actually having multiple leaders. It's actually having Tom Bonen be the guy. And then everyone else kind of played off that collective awareness that the rest of the peloton had, that Tom Bonen was the guy. I think when they famously muffed up the 2015 Het Nieuwsblad.
Het Nieuwsblad, yeah.
Yeah, like that was it was almost like they were working too hard to get Bonen into a situation where he would win the race. And it was just, you didn't have that same... Everyone else has to constantly contemplate what's going on with Quick-Step because there was one guy who wasn't on Quick-Step and all he had to do was hold wheels and then get into a break with someone he could outsprint. And that's what happened. And
standard.
Even in a stage race, I think the thing with multiple leaders in a stage race is there's so much that happens in a stage race, right? That randomness is really ground down to who is the strongest person putting out watts at threshold, or even more accurately, probably, who is going to have the least bad day, right? And so the decision is usually made on the road. The problem with the multi-leader approach, like you mentioned, Dane, is that if your top multi-leader isn't good to begin with, it's not going to end well no matter what. And the other problem is, like, how are you dividing your resources, right? If one of your multi-leaders gets dropped and the other two are strong, are you going to send a guy back for the drop dude, or are you going to be like, sorry, you got dropped, you're now no longer part of our trident? And I think Where things go wrong is you have teams where, like we saw with Belgium at the Euros, where you had basically two separate Belgian teams doing two separate things. Fortunately, it worked out. Tim Merlier was the fastest. It was a very good Tim Merlier sprint. It was a sprint for Tim Merlier, and he came through and won it beautifully. But yeah, I think that is the issue, is less having too many leaders or too many strong riders, and more like, how do you allocate your resources to support them? And so with the U.S. team, how many starters does the U.S. team have? Is it just 3?
The United States, greatest cycling nation on earth, Cosmo, has 8 riders for the men's race at Worlds. Thank you, mostly Matteo Jorgensen, probably. Brandon McNulty.
8 riders, man. Yeah.
It's shocking, is what it is.
That's great. USA. I feel like with 8 riders and three protected riders, let's call them, instead of leaders, I think you're probably going to do okay. I think Worlds is such a long race, such a race of attrition, that it will be clear relatively early who is going to be good at what on the day. And as long as the team communicates well and uses its resources wisely based on that information, instead of being like, oh, hey, Jorgensen's is totally off today. He got dropped at 100K out. Should we send someone back for him? The answer is no. We got to protect the guys we have. Like, if he's dropped at 100K, he's not going to come back and win this race anyway. So,
I think that's the key. It's just, smart use. I would imagine, to me, I'm just guessing here, but I'm thinking it's Powless and Jorgensen are going to get the most attention. And then with Simmons, it's a little bit hard to say, because I don't think this course suits Simmons as well as the other two, but he did look good at Luxembourg, so it's tricky to say. But I also want to point out that Richard in the Discord channel really kind of presaged everything that we said about multiple leaders. And so first, kudos to you, Richard. And second of all, this podcast should just be the Discord. Like, our commenters they're smart folks. That's all there is to it. Third and final question for our Q&A here today. And I love this one from David Savage. If they're both healthy and showing up with their best domestiques, who would have won a Grand Tour between Roglic and Remco? Assume Jonas and Tade are on vacation or something. And how close would it have been? I thought about this a lot in between you asking this a few hours ago and recording here. And I have come to the conclusion that I think, and I don't know what Cosmo's going to say, I think Remco probably takes it. I think it's tight. What's your thought there, Cosmo?
I would depend on which Grand Tour. I think.
Sure. Okay. Let's say it's the Tour and Primoz was healthy.
If it's the Tour, oh man. See, I was gonna say the Vuelta, or at the Vuelta, I would pick Remco, even though Roglic won it this year. At the Giro, I would pick Roglic, because Remco.
Why is that?
Didn't look as good kind of earlier in the year. But if they're both peaking for the Tour de France,
let's say they're both peaking.
They're both on form. They're both. I kind of lean towards Remco. Not that Roglic's team support has been lacking at all, but Remco did really, really well, especially with his team at this year's Tour.
Yeah,
I
with
think
Landa.
The Landissimo was just wow.
It was great.
And Roglic he's an up and down guy. He has good days and he has bad days. He kind of got away with not having a bad day at the Vuelta this year, but Remco, had bad days at the Tour and really held hit it well, fought through it when the drop came. That's tough to do. That, from my perspective as an amateur who is not good and has never raced a stage race longer than 4 days, that to me would be the hardest part, is what do you do when it's 12, 13 days into the race and you're completely boned and you need to figure out some way to not lose the race. No one is waiting for you. How do you sort that out? I don't think Roglic can't do it, but I think having seen Remco do it, I'm like, okay, well.
And we saw them head to head for at least a few days before Roglic crashed at the Tour, and I thought they looked pretty even on the climbs, and Remco was a better time trialist. And I think,
Is there a feature flag here for Remco, or for Roglic crashing? Can we say
right?
We have a scenario if Roglic crashes, if Roglic doesn't crash.
Because even if he comes in healthy, because the question is if they're both healthy, but does that mean he stays healthy through the race? Because it's obviously been a challenge for him doing that at the Tour de France. The Vuelta, he generally does quite a good job of staying upright, and the Tour not so much. I personally don't like to ascribe anything other than random chance to that. I feel like so much gets thrown down to, it's the Tour, of course he's going to crash. And I feel like there is a universe in which someone just randomly crashes a lot. That happens, and I feel bad for Roglic. But all right. Anyway, I think we're both on the slightly Remco train here by a little bit. Not by much. Great questions, Struan, Cafe Rider, David Savage. Thanks so much for those. All right, Cosmo, I want to go around the league a little bit. First off, let's just give people the update from Luxembourg. We're not going to do a full breakdown of what happened, but it was an interesting race for a variety of reasons. I think the main reasons being it showed us Worlds form. We saw Mathieu van der Poel come in second overall, generally had a great race throughout.
Yeah, but did he look like Worlds winning material? That's kind of the question, right?
I mean, he's not the favorite, so...
he not to jump, we're not do full how the race was won, but he won the first stage very convincingly, but it was also a Mathieu van der Poel stage, right? It was narrow roads, uphill sprint, sort of. A bunch of people finished on the same time, but it really wasn't a sprint. Van der Poel was moving up by himself without teammates into like 5th place at a K&a-half to go. It was very much a like kind of classicsy finish, and he showed that he is way stronger than everybody else, including Mark Hirschi in that finish. But then on stage 3, he when Mark Hirschi made an attack, he marked it right away and then didn't contribute at all. And then on the next climb, Hirschi actually got away from him a little bit before the field sort of regrouped. I would say he was looking less good than Wout van Aert was looking at the Vuelta. Not that Wout is going to be there at Worlds, but that's kind of my standard for looking good for Worlds.
I see what you're saying.
Yep.
In the end, it was Antonio Tiberi who won Luxembourg. Van der Poel second overall. Tiberi claiming the win with
bike racing,
savvy.
Man. Sneaky bike racing.
Yep. He was second in the TT and then managed to get into the right move on the last day. Got just enough time
8K to go on the last day, like right at the end of the
impressive.
Race. Yeah.
Hirschi, another World's favorite, inside the top 10 overall, but not quite there. Yeah. I think the big talking point from Luxembourg, though, Cosmo, and I only think this because I am on Instagram and I saw your post, is the way that some riders were disciplined.
Yep. I mean, we should start this conversation by me saying that I think the Supertuck rules are stupid, but we don't have to go into that here. The rules are there. They're written in text that is very clear. Hands on the handlebars. The only way a rider can support themselves. Hand on the handlebars, pedals, feet on the pedals, and actually it says seat in the saddle because I guess that's how you translate politely from French the word for buttocks. But Davide Formolo is in a breakaway with Mari van Sevenen, who also looked amazing at this race. He is real tired, Formolo is, and he is, I think, actually kind of as a courtesy because he's been getting yelled at by Van Sevenen for the past couple kilometers for not doing work. He's at the front doing an aero tuck. And what happens is he's got his butt on the saddle still. He's got his hands on the bars. His feet are obviously in the pedals, but he leans forward so far that his shoulders are on the handlebars. And that is pretty clearly not your hands on the handlebars, your feet in the pedals, yada, yada. And so I can see a disqualification for that. But
which happened?
Which happened. He was disqualified completely from the race, which I feel like is maybe excessive given that it wasn't like he wasn't in the middle of a pack. He wasn't on a crazy alpine descent. Literally everybody was straight line tucking this section, of course, because it was downhill. It was fast, almost too fast to pedal. Wasn't technical. But anyway, won Mathieu van der Poel in the very group behind, not the group right behind him, but the group behind the group behind. There's a picture of him moments later, with his hands on the handlebars, but they're over the hoods, and his forearms are very definitely resting on the top of the handlebar. And not only is forearms not hands on the handlebars, feet in the pedals, butt on the saddle, but they're in a supporting document for the UCI rule change. It's a very specific blurb that says, no supporting yourself with your forearms on the handlebars, in parentheses, except in a time trial. Now, I want to point out that if you saw Van der Poel riding like this, you wouldn't say, hey, wait, that's illegal. You would say that's Mathieu van der Poel riding a bike. Like, it's a normal way to ride a bike.
It looks normal.
And it was, since time immemorial, people have been riding a bike like this, at least since people got brake levers with hoods that they could put their hands on.
Right.
And I am of the opinion that people have been doing that basically, have been aero tucking in aerodynamic positions where their body and face are on literally touching the handlebars. They've been doing that for as long as they've been resting their hands and forearms on the bars. It's just that the UCI has decided as of late that one of those things looks weird. And so please don't ride your bike weird or you'll get disqualified from the race. No, we don't feel like riding a rule that is specific enough to say don't look weird. We're going to name these hands on the handlebars, feet on the pedals, butt on the saddle. But if your forearms rest on the handlebars, as long as it doesn't look weird, we're not going to disqualify.
It if it doesn't look weird, is what you're saying. So this is an instance, though, we've talked about UCI rules a fair bit on this show. This is an instance where the rule is actually relatively clearly written.
They went out of their way to like try and clarify this. There's a document with drawings, with like diagrams. I think it would have been better if they used actual pictures of actual people, but the UCI did try really hard to make it clear what they meant here. Yes. The words they used, the specific words, the official words in the rules, don't actually say what they meant, or at least don't comprehensively describe what's legal and what's not legal, which is what rules have to do.
And they don't describe what how the UCI will act, because the UCI has their plan of action is one thing, and then what's written is another thing. Yeah, kind of silly. I'm on board with that. Sorry, Davide Formulo. Ride your bike less weird, maybe.
I think we should be more okay with weird riding. I think, like I said, I think this has been happening forever, and I don't think it's that dangerous. I think it is harder to control a bike in that position, but I also think pros are generally inclined to not crash, inclined to not fall off their bike, inclined to know when they need to get out of their super aero position and into their regular position, which, by the way, they still crash in all the time because bike racing is dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that's around the league. Let's talk a little bit, not too much, because it's still several days away, but a little bit about what's coming up. It's the Worlds Road Race. We've got a course that favors the punchy climbers, the classics types. I mean, this is a one-day race, so you're going to expect the classics types to do well. And this one is, it's got a climb in it. Basically,
are there climbs in Switzerland? Switzerland has like mountains and stuff?
Well, they're not going to go over a huge mountain. we got to point that out. I mean, this is a race that's going to be, it's going to take them on a trek outside of Zurich, and then they're going to come back into Zurich and do a circuit. And they're going to do this circuit with its lumpy roads, one climb in particular, over and over and over again. And at the end of the day, after 274K, you're going to have a climber, or at least somebody who is pretty good at climbing, who's going to take the win. The Viticone climb, I think is how you say that. I hope that's how you say that. Almost 2K, about 6%. And last time they crested is about 20K from the finish, which means that if you attack on that climb, you're going to need to hold the attack for a little while. And if this were 5 years ago, I might start thinking this is a reduced sprint kind of race, or maybe 10 years ago. In 2024, I mean, how many races have we seen the favorite attack from a distance that not that long ago would have seemed impossible? It certainly feels like everybody's going to be watching Tadej Pogačar, waiting for him to attack, maybe even on the penultimate lap. What if he goes with 2 to go? It seems possible. He did it at Montreal. And I think the bookies are certainly expecting him to go at some point because he is the odds-on favorite for a one-day race, which is, it's astounding. I mean, you really just don't see that very often. But he is such a heavy favorite. And we're going to see how it plays out. Evenepoel, Van der Poel, Mark Hirschi, Matteo Jorgensen maybe has a chance. Slovenia's got a heck of a team because they also have Roglic. Could be an interesting race. Should be an interesting race.
It is an interesting climb. It's sort of a little double climb. Like there's a little kicker and then there's the categorized climb afterwards. It does look a lot like a Tadej Pogačar style finish.
It does. It really. I mean, at this point, so many races do, right? But yes, I agree with you. And I think I remember when I was doing up some analysis from Montreal, realizing how similar these two climbs were, the climb from Montreal and this one. And we talked about this last show. I think this is a great place for Pogačar to attack. I do, however, think it is not so steep as to make it like a foregone conclusion. It's not that hard of a climb. I mean, the hardness comes from the repeated doing of it over and over and over again. 6% is not the kind of gradient where Pogačar is just going to destroy everyone by default. And it's the sort of gradient where Mathieu van der Poel might be able to hold on for dear life. Certainly Remco Evenepoel might be able to hold on for dear life. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see that. Hopefully everybody will stay upright and we'll get a chance to see him at the very end of the day.
I mean, we need to talk too. He's not racing this with UAE, right? So he's not going to be able to Tour de France stage this the way he did at Montreal.
Yep, exactly. He's not going to have Micah on his team. He will have Primož Roglic, but they'll have to play nicely together.
He has a strong team, but he only has 6. Are there fewer Slovenians than Americans? How is that even possible? That can't be right.
They have 7, I think, and but they do have Roglic. They've got Domen Novak. Like it's a pretty
It's a
solid
really
squad.
good team, but it is
But it's
not
not UAE.
good the way UAE is relative to
Sure.
And I mean, who knows what's going to happen? This is national teams, so we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know who's actually invested in competing the races. There was
Yes.
a long time where the U.S. had a lot of starters. Thank you, Lance Armstrong, but also showed up at Worlds with no plan, no objective, basically rode around the course. And I think one time Chris Horner sprinted for like 9th, but yeah.
I personally would love the drama of Primoz Roglic just going rogue and trying to win it himself. And I hope that happens and gives us a fun thing to talk about. That's the men's race coming up here this weekend. Hope you get a chance to watch it. Women's race should also be interesting, of course. That one, I feel like Demi Vollering is going to be really hard to beat on a climber-friendly course.
She seems highly motivated, too.
Yeah. And I would be, too, having the year that she has had. Yeah, I think it's going to be a tricky one to beat the Dutch team, but then again, it always is, and they haven't won everything, so we'll see. All right, in a week's time, we'll be back to talk about our new rainbow jersey wearers. Or will they be just the same old rainbow jersey wearers? I guess we'll find out. In the meantime, hope you have a chance to enjoy all the racing. I have certainly enjoyed this conversation, as I do every Sunday night. I've been Dane Cash. Who are you? What was this?
I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that was the How the Race Was Won podcast.